Sabina, I think it's time start your interview. If you're ready to switch gears and get into talking about your scholarship a little bit with us and our lovely
Sure.
audience. Yeah.
Sure. What do you want to know?
Well, Daisy, do you want
So many
to
things.
do a little acknowledgments before we get
Yes.
into these questions?
We want to know so many things, but we can't get into that until I do a very important thing on our show that we haven't got to do in a while because it hasn't
Right.
been relevant until now.
Yeah.
It's been relevant, just not on the show. But that is thank our sleuthing team. So you might see Daisy and Dom on screen, and we goof around a lot, and you might think that this is just a two-person show that we do, but it's not. Okay. We have a whole team of people who we affectionately call our sleuthing team who help us do research for our guests and curate questions, find things about them that we hope are surprising and validating for every one of our guests. And Dom and I, would be completely lost without them, frankly, to have Folkwise. It would be a completely different show. So I just want to take that time to thank the sleuthing team for all of their hard work, their dedication, their creativity, their way that they turned my dream brain into actual legible sentences. All of those things I want to thank them for. So if you have the emotes in the chat to thank the sleuthing team, go ahead and do that there. And I think we're ready for the interview based on that.
I'd say so.
Good luck.
Yeah. Let's. Sabina, you ready to get into it?
Sure.
Cool. Okay. So our first question, was a little bit about narrative. But what we want to know is how do myths become living narratives within neo-pagan communities? And I guess the part two to that is we'll ask this first, and then we have a follow up to that. But how do myths become living narratives within neo-pagan communities? If we want to unpack that.
So let's really start by unpacking what we mean by myth first. When you
Please.
ask that question, what are you thinking about when you say that word?
What I'm thinking about is a sort of like a traditional sacred narrative, probably of like a ontological or ideological sense, but like a story, like a serious, realer than real story about how the world or its institutions came to be.
Right, and also I would say stories about gods and goddesses in the ancient past.
Yes.
So modern pagan religions draw inspiration from ancient polytheistic religions really all over the world because there are modern pagan movements, not just in the West. That's the one that I deal with and that we usually think about, but we have pagan revival movements in Latin America, in South America. We have pagan revival movements in Armenia, in Iran. I mean, very much under the table, right? But this is really, it's a worldwide phenomenon. So for now, I'm going to talk about Western paganism, which draws inspiration from generally European and Near Eastern mythologies. And North African if we include Egyptian. So, how do these stories become living? First of all, myths are used as metaphors for generally various kinds of processes, seasonal processes, but also processes of growth and development and fruition, and then death and reincarnation in the life of the individual. So generally, pagan religions see nature as a metaphor. Nature is sacred, but it's also a metaphor for the human condition. And so these stories become ways of talking about different aspects of both the natural world and the human condition, in that everything has a beginning and a seed, and then it develops, and then it comes to fruition, and then there's a harvest and an ending and a death, and then the whole process starts over again. But I think that these stories can also take on a different flavor in that they deepen our knowledge of different goddesses and gods, and these divine figures emerge as characters, right, in the narratives, and they develop in ways that that the myths as they have come down to us today don't necessarily include. right? I have a friend, Sarah Iles Johnston, the mythologist, the great scholar of Greek magic and myth at The Ohio State University, and she's written many wonderful books about this, including this book that I have right here called The Story of Myth. The Story of Myth, in which she tackles the question of how myths work in everyday life. And she and I had a lot of conversations while she was writing this book. And she even came to some pagan rituals with me to see how living people today incorporate these stories in worship, in rituals. Um, so, one of the things that she asked me is, do gods and goddesses change over time?
Mm.
Are the gods and goddesses, have they changed since they were being worshipped, say, by the ancient Greeks? And that's such an interesting question, right? So I turned that over to my interlocutors, as I always do, and most of them said that yes, that the gods and goddesses evolve right along with human beings, that their characters change and develop and grow, and what they want can change. Whereas, for example, in the past, gods and goddesses may have demanded sacrifices of living animals, but most people today don't. Most modern pagans today don't practice any kind of animal sacrifice. A sacrifice might be something much more personal, like a poem or a piece of music that you create for that particular deity, or maybe a wonderful ritual that you put together in which they are a main character. So I don't know. I've sort of gotten off the question, but
No, I'm still following.
I think those are great examples of like how these like it's very relatable to talk about like a poem that you give to someone or like I don't know a potted plant or something that you get or like planting something like that's a very tangible material way of like thinking about myth in everyday life. So yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I don't
Well,
think
I
you
guess that
trailed.
actually cues me up for a follow up that I wanted to ask, and it's have you seen the way you're talking about gods evolving or changing with people as time goes on? Have you observed like a belief of this outside of like the sort of formalized the worship communities? Like, have you seen this in sort of uh, like an informal cultural setting as well?
I'm not really sure what you're asking. I mean, the worship communities that we're talking about with modern paganism are pretty loose,
Mm-hmm.
largely because most modern pagans actually are solitary practitioners. So when I started studying the movement back in the very early 1990s, this was pre-internet. And the only way that you could learn about these religions was through reading books, through joining groups, maybe through attending some classes at a local occult shop. But that landscape has changed dramatically in the past 30 years. And now most people really learn about these things online, and they don't feel a need. Younger generations, I think, don't feel a need to join groups because they have all of this information as well as the opportunity to interact socially with people just at their fingertips through the internet, right? Through their phones and other devices. So we've seen a real shift in what we even mean by community, right? And some of these communities are extremely loose. You know, a bunch of TikTok accounts with a bunch of followers, a bunch of Instagram accounts with a bunch of followers. To what extent can we call those communities, really? Because people are interacting with one another, but not in any sustained way. So, do these things take place in these loose communities? Yeah, absolutely. People do tell stories, they share images, they share links and so forth, memes based on these characters, on these deities, and on other mythological characters. But yeah, to what extent are they even communities? That's a question that we all grapple with, all of us who study the modern pagan communities, right? Um, yeah.
No, that I think you answered exactly. You answered my question exactly right. So yeah, thank you.
I mean, I
And
think we can talk about networks. I think we can talk about a movement. Um, Communities in the sense that folklorists talk about them, in the sense of folk groups, those are a little bit harder to pin down.
interesting.
Unless, of course, I mean, there still are groups that meet face to face, and those would be communities. You know, they meet regularly, they see each other, but even those, they're a little bit different. I mean, I notice with my own groups, um, they are more like a kaleidoscope than a set of characters because every meeting you might have a different bunch of people show up.
I like the comparison to a kaleidoscope. I think that helps. Yeah. Thanks. Uh that was a lot of good stuff. I think you answered a kind of big question in a very nuanced way. So thanks for that. You ready for your second question?
Sure.
And this came up when we in the sleuths were doing research on you, and we were watching a little bit of Oz Tales, and
Oh, yeah.
so we have questions about your experience with film production, and what we want to know is how can ethnographic film capture the spiritual imagination sometimes better than writing?
Oof. That's a very hard question. I think ethnographic film captures the different things
Hmm.
than writing does, right? Ethnographic film, first of all, uh, puts you right in the moment.
Hmm.
So when we went to Padstow and we filmed uh, the Padstow May Day celebrations, I mean, you were there. I didn't need to write a description of the town. I didn't need to write a description of the characters. We were there. You could hear the characters. I mean, the people of Padstow speak for themselves, right? I mean, we went around. We interviewed young people, older people, middle-aged people. Um, you could see the os come out of the golden lion, the old traditional os, the red os. Um, you could see that because we filmed it. So those kinds of ethnographic descriptions, I think, are more vivid in a film than they
Hmm.
are in real life. In terms of capturing the spiritual imagination, the imagination is a very ephemeral thing because it really exists in the mind of each individual. And so you can't capture that unless a person shares that with you. And there, I think, it's six of one, half dozen of the other.
Mhm.
Um, Whether somebody shares it with you, like in the Berkeley uh, section of the Oz Tales. So Oz Tales is four films in
Mhm.
on one DVD. One of them is the original film shot by Alan Lomax and Peter Kennedy in Padstow in 1953. And the second one is the one that we shot about 50 years later in 2004 in Padstow. But then there's a film, a short film that we made on that DVD in Berkeley in, I believe it was 2001 or 2002, where we filmed a Berkeley pagan group's appropriation of the Oz, at least, and the song that goes with the Oz, and its incorporation in their May Day or Beltane celebration. And in that section, we have a couple of interviews with people who have carried the Oz,
Hmm.
who have the experience of being inside this costume, right? And both Russell and Dawn share what that experience is like for them. So that's where you begin to capture the spiritual imagination. What is it like for each of these men to be inside the os, to dance the os, to be waiting off in the wings, to be called into the circle, where their mind goes, what they imagine. Um, and, that it's wonderful to have them speaking about it, but honestly, if I had transcribed the interview and given you the passage in a book, I think it would have captured their words equally well.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting distinctions that were that you were making there. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's an internal experience, right? When we talk about something that's spiritual, the spiritual imagination, it's a very internal experience. So that really can't be captured either on film or in writing. So there, it's a toss-up.
Mm,
You know, a good filmmaker can capture it, but so can a good ethnographer. Can try to capture it. And again, we're really just giving people an approximation of what's going on, right?
yeah.
We're ethnography is uh, as um, as James Clifford writes, it is a kind of fiction, not in the sense that it is made up, but in the sense that it is constructed. And so the ethnographer constructs this world out of all of the facts that they gather, all of the interviews that they do, all of the time that they have spent in the community talking to people. They construct or reconstruct this world for other people to experience. And you do that whether you're making a film or writing an ethnography.
Yeah, you're making me think about how like central sensing is to the spiritual experience.
Mm.
The phenomenological, or like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
the sense of everything happening around, no matter what, is going to be different than you watching it on screen or reading it in a book. So neither of
Completely.
those capture that part, but they do capture different things, which just tells the story differently. Yeah.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're
That's
different
cool. Yeah.
storytelling tools.
Mm,
Hmm.
that's good. That's good. Um, I've got another question, but it's kind of a big one.
Okay.
Yeah,
But I'm gonna
in
try
our
to walk.
sleuthing,
I'm gonna try to
yeah,
walk into it, as it were.
yeah, we left with the big one. Then there's a couple follow-ups that I think build to the bigger question ultimately.
Okay. Not
But
afraid
yeah,
of big.
okay,
Okay.
cool.
So, Sabina, you've said before in another interview, quote, "The key to doing anthropology or folklore research effectively lies in successfully negotiating between the cultures you're studying and the culture of the academy. It's a form of walking between the worlds, as pagans like to say. Only in this case, I'm not walking about the spirit world. I'm not talking about the spirit world, but about cultures that belong very much to the material world. So I guess in the light of that, and like in the light of your career, how has your career as a folklorist, anthropologist, ethnographer been an example of walking between the worlds of the the spirit world and the spiritualities of your interlocutors, as you said, and the world of the academy?
I think my whole life is about walking between worlds.
Hmm.
You have to remember that I grew up in two different cultures simultaneously. I grew up in the United States, in the Midwest, where my father was at various institutions and universities as part of his work career. And then summers we would spend in Italy with my grandmothers and my cousins. So a very different culture, different language, very different experiences, right? And from a very young age, I was aware of the fact that these worlds were very different, right? And that I could walk between these worlds, that I had to negotiate between these worlds all the time because, among other things, growing up in a non-American household where English was largely not spoken in my home. I mean, my parents spoke English, but they made a very conscious choice to speak to us kids only in Italian so that we would not lose the language and to make sure that there were always reading materials. And in those days, there were records, they were actual
Hmm.
vinyl records, and other, supplemental materials that were in Italian. So, I literally negotiated that every time that I walked out the front door. And I think the anthropologist Kiran Narayan once said that anthropology is therapy for the culturally marginal. And that's certainly the case for me. When I got to university and discovered anthropology, it just, all the puzzle pieces just kind of clicked into place for me. And I thought, aha, okay, it all makes sense. These are different cultures. That's why they're different. That's why people in each culture are ethnocentric. They don't understand very much about the people in the other culture. They tend to think, oh, that way of doing things is bad or is wrong. Our way of doing things is the best. And this is why I'm always caught, in these fan blades. So being an ethnographer, being an anthropologist was really a way for me to figure my way out of that predicament and find value and usefulness in the skills that I had developed of moving between cultures, right? Negotiating cultures, negotiating different languages. And I learned that I could do this, you know, for a living. Cool. I'm down with this. So, so of course, my initial forays into ethnography were, first in the context of classes, these little mini projects that you do as a student at university and later in graduate school. But, then when I went to do my dissertation, I spent serious time. I spent a year in a very tiny village in I would say not the highlands, but the plateau, the Sardinian Logudoran plateau, and lived there for a year and studied traditional religious festivals and the effects of globalization on them in a tiny village where I really walked in knowing only one person.
Mm-hmm.
A woman who had worked for my grandmother for many years when I was a little girl. And so I had to kind of actualize those boundary crossing skills, those walking between the world skills, and learn a new language and learn a new culture and get to know people and so on and so forth. And then when I started my pagan fieldwork project, it was the same thing. I had to learn a new culture once again from a place where I only knew one person. First person I met who identified as a pagan openly was, well, maybe not the first person, but the first person I had serious contacts with was Selena Fox, a priestess in the Midwest, just outside of Madison, Wisconsin. And she invited me and some of the members of a class that I was teaching at the time to an Earth Day ritual on her property. And that's how my second and probably biggest field project was born. So I've always been a walker between the worlds. And adding that dimension of walking between the world of spirits, the spiritual world, the world of the imagination, if you will, and the human world didn't really seem that much of a leap. Probably because I had done a lot of that in my own imagination as a child. I mean, I was a very imaginative child. I had a very robust imaginary life with vivid characters and, lots of activities. And because I didn't belong to either of the cultures really that I grew up in, I spent a lot of time by myself. I was heavily bullied, especially in the United States. I didn't have a lot of friends. So like a lot of kids who have those experiences, I spent a lot of time reading and then kind of making believe, creating my own world where I had all kinds of imaginary adventures. So the pagan spiritual worlds felt very much like that to me. It was not hard to make that leap. Maybe easier for me than for an ethnographer with a different set of experiences growing up. I don't know.
Or at least part of what makes your experience and your scholarship a unique contribution to the world, to folklore, to,
Well, I hope it's
Yeah.
a unique contribution.
I feel like it is. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
all of our contributions are definitely unique, right? Because as
Yeah.
authors, each of us has a different positionality that includes our race, our gender, the languages that we grew up speaking, our culture, our sexual orientation, and gender identification, all of those things that make us who we are. And so each of our contributions is really unique.
Yeah.
Well, in the context of your own like unique path, if you keep to like the metaphor, like the axiom of you walking, I don't know. It strikes me that like that there's kind of like unpacking that I take it that you've had to do a lot, like in like the beginning of Witch and Cultures and everything, about like unpacking your biases about like being in an initiative like an initiative Wicca and also studying it. But I want to ask it kind of the way you're bringing this up about how we're all uh uh like our experiences and like the paths we took all like inform the scholarship we do. It strikes me that that is another thing that improved you as a ethnographer. The fact that you were actually like practicing while doing this field work. I mean, do you know what I mean?
Well, certainly if I had not gotten, well, let me back up. Let me
Yeah.
say that as Jeanne Favre-Sada wrote, right, and she was studying witchcraft in the Bocage in a very traditional part of France, in a small town part of France. She said, when you're studying magic, you're either in it or you're outside of it.
Mm.
There's no middle position. And that's certainly what I found in studying magic myself, studying magic and witchcraft. It's different from my relationship to, say, the town in Sardinia where I continue to work. In that you're either an insider or you're just not there at all.
Yeah.
So, in a sense, in order to really understand what my interlocutors were talking about, I had to become an insider. I had to become initiated. I had to practice, learn, and practice alongside them. And if I hadn't been willing to do that, I would not have been able to gain some really, really important insights. For example, when I first started talking with modern pagans, everybody kept talking to me about rituals as changing consciousness. And as a child of the 60s, I kind of thought I knew what that meant. I thought, oh yeah, consciousness raising, like raising our consciousness about things like environmental degradation and, sexism and racism. Yeah, consciousness raising. Well, guess what? That's not what they were talking about at all. I had it all wrong, completely wrong. And I didn't realize how wrong I had it until I was in a ritual and I had a mind altering experience, an experience that changed my consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
right? Changed my consciousness, not just like, oh yeah, racism is bad and no, like, boom. And I described that experience in the introduction to witching culture. And that experience opened my eyes, allowing me to ask different kinds of questions to my interlocutors, to look for different things and to hone in on really the purpose of ritual, the ultimate purpose of ritual. Now, not all rituals change everybody's consciousness every single time, but it is something that people are looking to get out of a good ritual. And I would have missed that if I hadn't participated, if I had just watched from the outside.
And I think I respect that answer so much, and both like both because I can tell it made you a better field worker, and you were able to get these like observations. You were able to understand these things about this particular culture better than someone who had like kept a kept their distance a little bit more and hadn't actually like been part of the ritual. But also, as anyone who hears that answer can attest to, on a personal level, it just sounds like you were just like you said, like
Yeah, I was
conscious.
changed.
You were changed
I
both.
was changed. My pagan fieldwork, well, all fieldwork changes you,
Yeah.
right? All fieldwork is deeply, deeply transformative. Um, my Sardinian fieldwork certainly changed me, really changed me. But so did my pagan fieldwork. And my pagan fieldwork, changed me spiritually as well as intellectually and, um, yeah, and emotionally, personally.
Yeah. That's really, I think, like what anyone can aspire to as an ethnographer is the moment to not just like intellectually like have a change in perspective, but like personally and spiritually. Like we would all be that lucky. And I just think it's such a great uh like it's such a great story to hear from someone who does this kind of research. I really like uh I don't know. I feel good hearing it.
Well, I would hope that all folklorists and anthropologists who go out and do ethnographic research have experiences that change them deeply.
Yeah.
That's kind of the hope.
Mhm. Um Circling back a little bit to you talking about uh growing up with like your American family that was very Italian, and then spending time like in Italy, going back and forth. Um I didn't want to have you on the show without thanking you. And I don't know if you remember this, when I was but a lowly grad student at like a fellows dinner at AFS one year. I don't know if you remember this, but um I asked you for like some of the best input of my professional career. And it was, what do I correct people on the GL in my name? Because we both share an Italian GL in our names. And I remember the advice, because I grew up, you know, my dad is also of like the generation where he went back to Italy. Like he grew up in New Jersey and then lived in Bologna, and like, you know, he was back and forth all the time. And I always grew up like with the expectation that like people were going to get my name. Like I was like going to have to like teach people how to say my name. And I remember asking you about it one time at the American Folklore Society, and I remember you saying, uh, that isn't necessarily the hill the hill you want to die on.
Yeah,
Is
it's
what
not
you
the hill
said.
I want to die
It's
on.
not the hill you
Yeah.
want to die on. And no one had ever told me that before, and like the more I learn about like you and like your career and like your life story especially, there is no one else better I could have asked about that like phoneme. You know what I mean? It seems like such a little thing. It's two little letters, you know?
I mean,
But it really
it's a
was
big
like,
thing.
yeah, it was a big thing in
I
like
mean,
my life.
these are our names, and I think
Yeah.
also the culture, Dom, the culture has shifted since then,
Mm,
right? So now we have much more diverse student populations. We have much more diverse populations in general in North America, and there's also much more awareness of microaggressions
mm,
and how those microaggressions really affect people in a diverse work or educational environment.
yeah.
So today, I might have a different answer, right? Today, for example, I am very clear that with students and colleagues, I want to pronounce their name correctly. I want them to teach me how to pronounce it correctly, and I will keep practicing it until I get it right because it's really important to me.
Yeah.
Because I grew up with a weird name,
Yeah.
it's really important to me to say the names of my coworkers and students correctly and to call them by the name that they want to be called by. But growing up in a very different time, you know, the 50s and 60s, 70s were a very different time.
Hmm.
Um, and I still have people who mispronounce my name. You know, did I grew up thinking it might not be the hill that I want to die on, right? And so I give people options. I tell people you can pronounce it the Italian way, and I have a link in my email that uh, to a voice thing that
Hmm.
tells you how to pronounce my name correctly. You can pronounce it the English way with the G, Magliocco. Not
Uh-huh.
my favorite, but if that's all you can manage, I will accept that. And I will also accept Professor M and Dr. M.
Mm.
So y'all, you know, there are some things I won't accept, right? There are some hills I want to die on. Hey, you, yeah, no.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, no. Uh, I don't like, this is one that they do a lot here in BC. Dr. Sabina or Professor Sabina. Yeah, no.
Mm.
Yeah, no. If I don't know you, I'm not your buddy,
Sure.
you know? So call me by my last name. I give you a lot of options, pick one. And Mrs. So Mrs. Magliocco, Mrs. Magliocco was my mother,
Yeah.
right? I'm not her. In fact, when she was alive, I actually even had that on my syllabus. Mrs. Magliocco is not me. That's my
That's my
mother.
mom.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. I mean, from so I guess from a Tartaglia to a Magliocco, I just want to say thank you for that little bit, because I think it honestly, like, it roughed out an edge that I don't think had to be there all the time. Is what I think I'm getting there. You know what I mean? But if I
Mm.
have if I have the permission to get real yeah with your last name, I will
Yeah, yeah.
Magliocco you for the rest of the time.
Yeah, yeah, no, I appreciate it when people make an effort to learn how to say my name right. And even if they can't get the "y" just right,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, Malioko, I'll accept that.
Yeah.
That doesn't have the "y," but I think we also have to recognize that for people who didn't grow up saying a certain sound,
Mm-hmm.
it is really difficult to produce that.
Yeah.
So, I know, for example, with some of my indigenous students or with some of my Asian students, I practice saying their names correctly, but I will never be able to really reproduce
Mm.
some of those sounds exactly correctly. I will come close, but it will never be like a native speaker because
Yeah.
I'm, 65 years old trying to say this name now, not 2 years old practicing the sounds the way that toddlers do when they're just
Yeah.
learning to make them.
Trying to retrain your tongue to move like that. Yeah.
Right,
It's a
right.
muscle.
So I get it. I get it that some people will not be able to make that sound. And that's okay.
That's okay. Exactly. You want to move to less serious stuff and get into some of the fun side of your interview?
Sure,
These
sure. I mean, I'm looking at the time and I'm thinking, yeah, maybe we should because we've only got about 20 minutes
Let's
left.
do it.
No
Let's move
worries.
right along. This is a lot
They
of
can be fast.
this is a lot of fun stuff that we found while research, like while doing the research on you, that maybe fits in like a shorter question. First one: what's the most surprising esoteric Italian foodway that's crossed over since your paper in the early '90s?
The most exciting
Or
esoteric. Wait, what are you asking me about the weirdest thing I've ever eaten? Is that what
no,
you're asking
I
me?
wasn't. But we no. Now we're going in that direction. I guess I was saying of when you talked about the Little Italy Festival in Clinton, Indiana, and
Oh, the Little
esoteric.
Italy
You
Festival.
talked about
Yeah.
esoteric Italian food.
Yeah.
What is a food that used to be an esoteric Italian food that you are surprised is sort of
Oh,
a
there's
general
so
food?
many. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a general food, but for example, squid ink pasta.
Mm-hmm.
Squid ink pasta. Like, in the 70s, even the 80s, you would never see
Yeah.
that on a menu, like fucking anywhere, right? But
Yeah.
now it is something that I would expect to see on a menu, for example, at a fancy upscale, I would say upscale Italian restaurant,
Yeah.
basically anywhere in San Francisco, here in Vancouver, in Chicago, in obviously on the East Coast. So yeah, that is something that I never expected to see, but that now, you know, not everyone. It isn't, on everybody's menu all the time, but it's definitely um, something esoteric.
Yeah. The
Yeah,
great
absolutely.
example.
Yeah.
Daisy, you want to ask this next one because I know it's very important to
Oh,
you.
oh, I definitely do. Okay. What is your favorite Ursula Le Guin short story or novel?
Oh my God. She's my favorite writer. She is the writer that has influenced my writing more than any other, simply in the way that her sentences have a rhythm and her words, her sentences are powerful,
Mm.
right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I admire that and aspire to that, particularly in my more descriptive writing. Obviously, if I'm writing
Sure.
about theory, it's a little bit harder to do.
Sure.
So, what is my favorite of her novels? I love the Earthsea tetralogy.
Yes. Oh.
I love the Earthsea tetralogy, and perhaps my favorite of those is actually Tehanu.
I'll have to take note of that because I have that's one of my like fiction reads that I don't have time for as a dissertating person right now. That I'm like, that is like on my bookshelf of the series of Earthsea. I'm like, I'm ready to dive into Earthsea. That's like the one I haven't like.
So, but I
crossed
don't
into
know
yet.
whether you will. So many people don't get Tehanu. Tehanu is Earthsea at middle age. So
Okay,
the first three novels really are about their coming of age stories.
sure.
Tehanu is about middle age.
Okay.
It's about coming to terms with your limitations.
Mm.
It's about realizing that you can't do it all, and that things end, and that you have to make choices, and that you can't save them all.
Might be a good lesson for me then, honestly.
It is a wonderful book.
As I approach 30, I'm excited to dive in then, I guess. Awesome. Next question.
Next question. If you were in a party in a circle of people and someone handed you a guitar, what would you play?
Oh my goodness, I think it would depend what was going on, what kind of party. So I have been in a series of bands in my life, really up until the time that I was working full time on a tenure track. And I generally played traditional and bluegrass music. So I think it would depend on what I was in the mood for, what kind of party it was, what other people were in the mood for. But probably a very traditional song.
Love that.
And I'm gonna actually briefly. I'll put this up for the chat to see here. Yeah, they can see it. They can see the picture.
We gotta pull up an image for this last one.
I have an image pulled up of you, I believe in like your 20s or 30s with a baby possum.
Oh, I was about that was like 1978 or something. I was very young.
Maybe even younger than.
It's an excellent photo. And I guess
I know which one it is.
Yeah. Yes.
The famous picture of you and a possum, and in your years and years of possum rearing experience, as you introduce yourself as the mother of possums, what's a possum fact? What's a fact about these animals that most people wouldn't know?
They have a very low body temperature compared to other mammals, and that makes it almost impossible. It makes it very difficult for them to get rabies.
Oh,
that's because
why
the rabies bacterium cannot survive in that cooler environment that is their bloodstream.
Wow.
I knew that people talked about them not being able to get rabies, but I had no idea like what the biological reason for that was. Yeah.
It's harder for them. Okay. So it isn't true. I mean, I cannot vouch for the fact that I don't know. There may be cases of opossums that have gotten rabies. So this factoid is not an excuse for anybody to go out and pick up a possum, without proper protection. They are wild animals. They can bite you. And you don't want to have the rabies protocol because it is a whole series of shots that you have to have. So it's really better if you don't mess with them or mess with any wild animal, really. But that is a little factoid. They are very unlikely.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Awesome. For the body temperature.
Yeah, and
they're also they're North America's only marsupial.
Oh yeah.
Somebody in the chat did say marsupial spotting. So we love marsupials on this show. As you know, I'm interested in Tasmanian tigers.
Great.
They're the best. Oh my god! I've had friends. Sometimes I joke about the term like placental mammal chauvinism because it sounds like a goofy. It's such a high level, like dumb academic kind of.
Daisy's dead serious about that.
I know that, Sabina, you understand what I mean.
I totally get it. Yes,
yes, we got it.
Really, it completely leaves out both marsupials and monotremes. Like what about monotremes?
Yes.
Like monotreme power, right?
Yes.
Power to the monotremes.
Power to the monotremes.
And people think that they're like dumb because they never evolved past. It's like part of that like very linear view and interpretation of what evolution is.
It's very unilinear
Yeah.
view of evolution, but
Yeah.
actually, some of the newest research shows that possums are not dumb, even though
Yeah.
their brains are pretty small. They have all the smarts that they need to find food and survive. They
Exactly.
That's so
have a
cool.
lot of emotions. You can see,
Yeah.
opossum mothers are very good mothers. They care about their babies. They take very
Yeah.
good care of their babies. And sometimes opossum mothers that have been rescued and have reared a litter of joeys, that's what
Mhm.
opossum babies are
Mhm.
called, will adopt a whole new litter. Like a new litter comes in, they don't have a mom. The mom will
And it was at that exact moment that she lost power and the interview ended prematurely. Hi, everyone. It's Editing Dom, his evil twin. And I just want to say thank you so much to Sabina, who had a wonderful interview. Everybody in chat was saying it. Everybody was dropping ladders and saying how good this was. And I also know because we had so many chat questions queued on the docket that we didn't get a chance to ask her before her power died. Not only that, but we had a banger tier list ready for her. So here's what I want to say from chat. If you see this interview and you have a question you wish you could have asked Sabina before her power died, send it to folkwise13@gmail.com. Maybe one day we'll get back with Sabina, ask her all of the questions from chat and from the viewers at home, have her do her Forbidden Cats tier list finally, and get back with her because you all thought, and we at Folkwise thought this was a great interview. She had such great things to say and such understandable ways of saying them. And I want her back on to finish this interview as much as you do. All right. See ya.